Patrick said, my name's Chris McCann. I sort of help him coordinate this, so he does most of the work. So in my day job, I work for a government, sort of quasi-government contractor, doing a lot of Java development in missile defense and intelligence. And my real life, though, is actually using Ruby and Rails to build cool web apps. I have a project I'm working on right now that led me down a very strange path. Some of you might have seen the email that I put out on the JRuby user group a while ago, trying to get some suggestions on how to handle spreadsheets. And Matt had some suggestions, and so did John, so thank you guys. So the topic of this talk is what I ended up doing, JRuby and Rails, and why on earth? Why on earth would you use JRuby and Rails? And I'm here to tell you one reason that worked for me. So as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. I believe it's actually kind of flipped around. Necessity is a mother, because I wanted to build this app to connect basically one each Rails app with active record models to these very complicated Excel spreadsheets that do this financial modeling. Just basically wanted to allow users to store the input data in active record models, interact with it through the standard cool Ajax-y kind of web interface, and pass that data onto the spreadsheets and let the spreadsheets do all the hard calculations, because that's what Excel is really good at. And the guy I'm working with on this project is pretty much a guru when it comes to building really complicated financial models and spreadsheets. So I thought, why reinvent the wheel? And in the end, allow a user to download what I call a live spreadsheet, not just some thing that looks like a spreadsheet that you can open as a CSV file, but a no kidding spreadsheet with formulas with their data in it, so they have a very useful tool by downloading this from our app. So that was my goal. So I decided to go the easy way, which anybody who does Rails development thinks this is kind of a special need. There's got to be a gem for this. Hey, use the Ruby spreadsheet gem. And straight from their website, reading is easy, writing is easy. You should be able to fill in data to be evaluated by predefined formulas. Yes, yes I should, but alas, I cannot. So my quote from my experience with that gem was, a to-do in your source code does not equal functionality. And therefore, there should not be a bullet on your website saying you can do this, when clearly in the code it says, someday we'll implement this in Rev 94 or whatever. And that was a bit frustrating. So I did a little more research, got out to Google, and went to work and came across this thing called Spreadsheet. I'm like, whoa, Spreadsheet, that sounds like what I'm after. So I'm reading this and I'm getting excited. So need to manipulate or dynamically generate Excel spreadsheets? Yes! Need to perform complex spreadsheet calculations on data in a database? Yes! Tired of being restricted to providing users CSV files when you really want formulas, formatting, blah, blah? Yes, yes, yes! Want your Perl, Python, or TC? Ah, shit. No, that's not what I want. I don't want Perl or Python. No. The answer is no. So Spreadsheet, not gonna work. OK. So I thought, let's turn this on its head. This is when I put the email out and got some good feedback from Matt and some other folks. Why not just invent this thing? If it doesn't exist, why not invent it? So build a formula calculation engine in Ruby. There's some great stuff out there, open source, that is effectively kind of the mathematical model behind how Excel and other spreadsheets work. And there's source code in Java you could use, and you could poach that and rewrite it in Ruby. Would be sweet. So pass the model inputs to the engine, calculate the formula values, populate a spreadsheet with the values. And since that's going to take me so long, why don't I just rewrite like the new Google book while I'm at it, because that's going to take me about 1,000 years to do by myself. So that's not going to work. So desperation sets in. I start Googling all these terms: Excel, spreadsheet engine, spreadsheet calculation, Excel spreadsheet calculation engine. And I come across this idea that you can use Microsoft Excel Web Services. They've wrapped Excel in a web API, and you can deploy that on a SharePoint server running on a Windows 2008 server. And then you can access your Excel spreadsheets that are stored in a document repo in SharePoint, and just wrap all that in a web service, and it's done. And this is where I wave my hands and a miracle occurs. So I started thinking, Microsoft, SharePoint, web services. Like, I'm a Redditor, so I have to use at least one meme slide on my presentation. So F you, no, that's not going to work. This is just not going to be, this is not going to work at all. So I did what most lazy people do, and I asked people smarter than myself how to solve a problem. If it were their problem, how would they go about it? And I've been to a couple of the Pragmatic Programmer courses. They're great. Highly recommend it. I mean, you're taught by Dave and Thomas and Chad Fowler. Those guys literally teach the courses, and they're just fantastic instructors. So I am on this mailing list through the Yahoo groups. And so I put a question out. Here's what I'm trying to do. Anybody have suggestions on how to do it? And this one gentleman wrote back and said, why not use JRuby? You can build a Rails app, and there are a lot of great libraries out there. There's probably one in Java for handling Excel, so why don't you check that out? And I thought, well, I know Java. That's what I do every day. Corporations love Java. Corporations love spreadsheets. Therefore, there's probably something out there for me. So JRuby entered the picture. JRuby, what's that? Well, JRuby.org tells you simply it's 100% pure Java implementation of Ruby instead of the C-based Ruby that we all know and love. It's just Ruby, straight off their website, 187 and 192 compatible. You get them both with a single installation. All right, let's check this out. And then, why? Why would you use this? Well, it's basically Ruby running in the VM, the JVM. So you get high performance, according to them, real threading, unlike the Unreal threading that's currently in Ruby. And most importantly, foot stomper, a vast array of libraries. I'm hoping in one of those vast arrays of libraries is something that I can actually put to use and save the day. So that's when I started really getting interested in the possibilities. So at that point, I thought, well, let's see what the Google says about that vast array of libraries. So I put in Java, Excel, Spreadsheet, and the first link that pops up from Google is this Apache Poi Project. And Apache, there's some pretty smart guys. They've been around doing some cool stuff for a long time. A lot of stuff that's in very common use, especially in the Java world, put out by Apache. So I thought, let's look into this. And it turns out this is a pretty great library. And actually, I emailed the user group last night and asked, what does POI stand for? Because I can't find it anywhere, and it's got to mean something. It's not poi like the stuff you get in Hawaii. It stands for poor obfuscation implementation, or poorly obfuscated implementation, one of those. And basically, their explanation was that looking at the file formats for Microsoft Office documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, that the standard for those documents was so confusing, it must have been purposely obfuscated, so people could not reverse engineer it. But it was poorly obfuscated because it was reverse engineered, and now this project exists. So they have named things like POI and HSSF, horrible spreadsheet format, and they have this dastardly document drawing format. They have all these names that just take the piss out of Microsoft for writing really crappy formats that are very proprietary. But they're smart. They reverse engineered them. So I started looking into this. So I'm like, all right, well, that takes care of a couple of pieces. What about Rails? Can I do Rails in JRuby? And oddly enough, the JRuby guys have a GitHub account that's called JRuby on Rails. And basically, you can read all that. It says, yes, you can do it. And I will point out, again, access to the Java ecosphere. I'm not really sure what an ecosphere is here, but in that case, they're saying more about this. Hey, there's a lot of libraries out there. So at this point, I decide I'm going to go for it. Put out a little note. How do I do JRuby? John, you helped me. Thank you on your suggestions. And that got me up and running. So how do you get it? You can go to the jruby.org, or you could just, if you use RVM, and if you're not, you're making life difficult on yourself, RVM, install JRuby. And that's all there is to it. By default, though, it loads Ruby 1.8.7. I needed 1.9, and the RVM docs explain how to do this. JRuby ops gets 1.9, and you can then have 1.9.2 running in JRuby and get all that Ruby 1.9 goodness. So I did that, and I got it. I did come across one gotcha, and that's why I told Patrick in the email yesterday when I put out the request for another talk. I said, if I can get this demo running on my laptop, I will do this talk. And the problem was it wouldn't run. My code that I had running on my iMac would not run on my laptop. I didn't know why. I thought, well, maybe I'm using a wrong version of Java. And I still have 10.58 on this thing, and I had Java 1.5. So I thought, well, maybe upgrading to the latest edition of Java for this OS version will do it. So I got the 1.6, then I checked the Java version, and it still says 1.5.0_26. And that's not what I downloaded. I downloaded 1.6. But there's a thing you can do if you don't know this already. I found this on the web. Applications, utilities, Java preferences. You can drag the little SE6 up to the top of the list, and it automatically loads that version of Java in the background. So that becomes the active default version of Java on your Mac. So with that in place, it actually worked. And I was able to get the demo that I had built working on this. So as far as JRuby goes, how do you learn JRuby? Cheat! Get the book! This book is fantastic. It's written by the guy that wrote JRuby. So I highly recommend it. That's what I did. Matter of fact, as a shameless plug for the pragmatic programmers, I have a copy of the book here. This book is great because it's really relatively recently put out, and it covers a lot of little topics on JRuby that I wasn't aware of. If you don't know Java at all, it's really good. I know Java pretty well, so it was kind of more introductory on a lot of levels for that stuff. But it tells you how to bridge the gap between Java and JRuby, and I'll go into that in a second in my demo. So that book is great, and I'll explain a couple things from it that are actually wrong. OK, so key features for using Java. So let's say this is straight out of TextMate. If you want to use Java classes like this POI project like I want to use in a .rb file running in JRuby, and it has to be JRuby, it won't run in regular Ruby because it doesn't know about Java, you do things like this include statement, include Java. And that basically bridges Ruby and the JVM and connects it for you. And it also gives you the goodness, like the second bullet says, shortcuts for core classes, which I'll get to in a second. If you then need to use one of these special classes, one of this vast array of libraries, you have to get the jar files. And a jar simply is a Java archive. It is basically a whole bunch of compiled class files all bound up in effectively what is just a zip file. And that's how you can put your compiled class files into your application and use them with just a require statement. So include Java. You may see this include or even a require with quoted little Java. That does not work anymore with the latest version of JRuby. That's what's in the book. It doesn't work. Use include and then big Java, no quotes. Let's see. So then you can require the jars for the classes that you want to use. That brings the jars into your project. So then you have the beginnings of a class definition here, this thing that I wrote to adapt this spreadsheet to this financial analysis model that I had. This bullet here about shortcut for core classes. So if you want to use something like a file input stream, which is how you basically stream a file into your application to monkey with it, that's a core Java class. It's in the Java IO package. With this Java include Java up there, you don't need this Java : here. You get these core classes without that extra, what's that, 6 characters. So it saves you 6 characters and gives you a couple other things under the hood, which is kind of nice. So you have to put this in, even though these are core classes, since we are dealing with Ruby, you have to tell it that you want to use this class. So you have to do that include class thing. And then in the case of using this class from the POI project, the XSF workbook, this thing lives inside this jar file. So I've required the jar, and then I do an include class. And this time I have to tell it Java : and then the fully qualified path name to the class that I want to use, this XSF workbook. Okay? So that explicitly allows me to use the classes from the jars. And you only have to do that with the classes that you're explicitly using. And if you have a variable that you're naming that or you're calling a static method on a class, you have to do this to bring those classes in so that your program knows that it can use them and access them. And I'll show you some little weirdnesses in the console when I do a little demo here. So this is the major part of using Java in JRuby. If you can get this, you can use pretty much every library known to man in Java that you can get a jar for, and it opens up a huge range of possibilities for you. One of the things that you get with this, that whole Java bridging the gap between the JVM and Ruby, is this syntax translation. So in Ruby, when we want to call a method on a class, like file input stream, if we want a new one, we call it .new and give it its parameters. Workbook equals the class name .new and pass it in. So these are actually Java objects, but we're calling them with a Ruby-style syntax to call methods. So this JRuby thingy gives you this instead of doing the Java style. And it does a direct translation of the Java file, Java syntax for calling methods on objects, and allows you to call them in a Ruby way. You can't do this in the Ruby, by the way, because it's not Ruby syntax. But if you can find a Java method that is camel-cased, you can just do the standard put underscores in place of the camel cases. And you can put things around and use dot syntax just like you always do. So that's kind of nice. It makes it easy to use because it's a calling syntax that you're used to if you program in Ruby. OK, so at this point, I will say, are there any questions as to what I'm trying to do here? No questions. Oh, it's always one. If you have a question, make sure you. Yes.
I was curious if you're using.
That's a great question. I have a file input stream because this class requires a file input stream as its input as a parameter. Does that answer your question?
Got it. OK, so it's an interface with. Ruby libraries don't work.
Because I'm calling on a method, I'm calling it on a Java class, so I have to give it the type of parameter that it expects to receive. Yeah. Does that thing work? Oscar Fox mode, as we would say. Yeah.
So how does JRuby deal with the case of ambiguous, like if there's more than one function and with different type parameters that it accepts? Like this looks very much like RJB. And in RJB, you can be explicit in the case of ambiguity. Is there something like that in JRuby?
I haven't encountered that yet. You're talking like method overloading, where you just have a different set of parameters?
Right. Like if you have a Java, if you have more than one Java method that are differentiated by the parameters they accept.
I suspect there are other file input stream methods that take something besides a path to a file, and you can call those as long as you provide it with the correct input parameters. I assume it will, in the background, call the correct method for you.
But you haven't encountered a case where you have to be explicit with it and tell it which method you want exactly?
No, I haven't had to, as they say, disambiguate those calls yet. I haven't come across that. Okay, so remember I wanted to just write a Rails app that talked to a spreadsheet and do some calculations, and all the other things I tried didn't work, so I came down to this. So lastly, just as a reminder here, so the model I'm working on is a thing for commercial leases. So we have a proposal that someone wants to make. They do a financial analysis to see if it makes sense to them. And in the real world, some guy's going to just take some information off of a Word document, type it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then run the financial analysis. So I'm trying to Railsify all of that and make a web app that does this. Did not want to reinvent the wheel with the Excel spreadsheets, so that's how I got to where I am. So this is what the model I'm about to show you here that I created in TextMate, what it looks like. So let's go in here. So let me show this little snippet of a spreadsheet if I can. Here we go. So this is just a little piece of the spreadsheet that let me raise it up a little more. Anyway, so one each standard spreadsheet. The things in blue are inputs. So what I like to do is have my program be able to feed in numbers to these various things. And the things in black are outputs, or what we call formulas. Let me scroll this down a little bit. We can see. There we go. Back over here. There we go. Okay, so as anybody who's ever used a spreadsheet knows, if there are formulas that rely on inputs. If I change this, you'll see things change. So really basic. You change the lease term from 60 months to 72 or vice versa, you'll get a difference in the cost down here for these allowances that are amortized over time. So this is a payment function. This is a standard financial function, but if you have to go back and implement these things yourself, it's a giant pain in the butt. There's really no sense in going back and creating these formulas when they already exist somewhere that you can get at them. Especially when you have the requirements that I did to be able to access this from a website and then give people the ability to download stuff as well. So basically what I did, I created this proposal model and a financial analysis model. So the goal was to be able to take values from the proposal, feed into the financial analysis, and have that plug values into the spreadsheet. Without going into all the details that I built to make this work, effectively what I did was built this analysis adapter that wraps the Excel spreadsheet, uses that POI library to talk to it, but then use method missing in the financial analysis to go in and be able to retrieve values out of cells in the Excel spreadsheet. So let me go back over here, make sure this thing is saved with the correct value. I'll come back over here and I'll say, so that's the analysis adapter thingy that I built. Okay, I just refreshed it. Now, what I can do with this financial analysis, if I give it a thing like lease term, which was cell C16, it'll go out, method missing, communicate through the analysis adapter, and that will then go directly and pull the cell value of C16. You can also go cell value, D16. Okay, that reads the cell value. Great. So I can also do is get named cell values. I'll grab one here that's kind of hard to remember. If I can find my mouse. Hello. All right. So if I come down here and get the value of this cell down here, cell D33, that's a formula value. And one thing to note if you ever use this particular library, formulas and cells are different. You can't ask a formula what a cell value is. It'll say I'm nil because I'm a formula. And if you ask a cell what its formula value is, it will throw an exception because it doesn't have one. So I can now go a formula value, go D3, and tell you 2027 point blah, 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 which you can see is effectively what that 2028 number at the very bottom corner is there. So all that's great. I can read values out of a spreadsheet. I can put input values. And I could do that with the Ruby spreadsheet gem. What I couldn't do with the Ruby spreadsheet gem, and why I went through all of this trouble, and I'm giving this talk, is because I want to be able to change the values on the fly and get the calculated formula values back. So if I do this, if I say set cell value, and if I set cell C16, which was the least term, if I set it to, I can do least term. If I set that from 60 to 72 months, okay, I get nil back because it just returns no value. If I were to go to the spreadsheet, because I'm looking at the spreadsheet live, I'm not going to see a change because the spreadsheet's all being held in memory in the POI project. But if I were to save this spreadsheet back out from the Ruby project into the spreadsheet, then we open the spreadsheet back up, that value would be changed. But we don't really need to do that because we're just trying to use the spreadsheet as a calculation engine. So if I now do this, a formula value, and I give this crazy name, amortized additional allowance per month, you'll see now it's 1753. So if I come up here and I change this value to 72, you'll see that this value down here changes to 1753. And that little ditty right there was what this whole thing was all about. Because this spreadsheet is 390 columns wide or something crazy like that. And you can do financial analysis on lease costs for commercial leases with a 30-year term. And you can get the values back for any month in that 30-year term. You can put in early termination items. You can do all kinds of things that someone would want to do with a spreadsheet. So this will allow us now to have somebody create this proposal and create a financial analysis from that proposal. And then in the background, and when they want to look at the financial analysis in a Ruby on Rails view, I can go and just pull those values from the spreadsheet, put them into the view very quickly, and show them the values. And when they change a value through AJAX, I can feed that value back into my model, do this calculation we just saw, and then retrieve any values that change on the spreadsheet that's in view and show it as if they're looking at an actual spreadsheet. So this works basically the way I had hoped it would. And this is a prototype for what I'm going to actually build. I will mention one other thing I did try to use, which I didn't occur to me until just now that I had used it, was Google Spreadsheet. There is actually a really good Ruby library that lets you access Google Docs, and you can actually get at a spreadsheet you have stored in your Google Docs account. And if you use Google Docs or Google Spreadsheet, you'll find that you can change a value in their nice AJAX-y GWiz interface, and the values will instantly change in the spreadsheet that you're looking at on the screen, no matter how complex the formulas are. The problem I found is accessing this through a Ruby project and accessing the Google Doc was that you could change the value just on the command line on console here with your spreadsheet up in another window, and you see the value change almost instantly in the spreadsheet, which is really cool. And then you see the formula value that's related to that change. So then in the console, you try to retrieve that changed value of the spreadsheet, and it takes 10 seconds. Which if you're trying to build a user interface where someone wants to change a number, just like on Excel, and see it change over here, that's a non-starter. I asked around. I could not figure out why there was so much lag. I think basically what's happening in the background is the entire spreadsheet is being pulled back down in XML from Google, being recalculated and on the fly, and then the values spit out. And that lag is anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds, depending on how big the spreadsheet was. using this POI project, my ultimate goal is to keep the spreadsheet on Amazon S3. When I need to load one up for an analysis, pull it in from S3, keep it in memory, let someone monkey with it, and when they're done monkeying with it, we'll just flush it out. And when they want to download it, you can actually then download the spreadsheet just using a file output stream and stream it back to their browser, and they have a complete full-up XLSX, which is the XML version of Excel spreadsheet that they could then open up on their desktop and have it work just like you would expect the spreadsheet to work. That, my friends, is why I took a path down JRuby. And that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. One,
Sure.
do you need Excel to be installed on the server for it to be able to recalculate stuff?
No, this is all done purely in the POI project. Yep. Yep. Yeah, they have a very large object model that basically replicates Excel spreadsheets.
How do you run JRuby stuff in production?
How do you run it in production? There are a couple different ways. You can deploy it to like Tomcat. You could deploy it to Glassfish, which I'm not going to do. You could deploy it to, I think, WebSphere. Any web container that you can deploy Java web apps to, you can deploy JRuby to. And what was the project that you mentioned? I looked into briefly.
There's two really good ones. There's one called Trinidad.
Trinidad.
Which is just, you can just go to the root of your Rails project and type Trinidad, and it'll start up just like typing Rails apps. And there's another one called Torquebox, which has built-in message queues, and it's like a wrapper around JBoss.
Yeah.
It's a little heavier, but more features.
And the only thing that,
No, I think like Engineer is doing their deployments on Trinidad. So it's just wrapping Tomcat. And Torquebox wraps JBoss.
and the one thing I haven't tried to do yet with this is actually deploy it to a hosting service somewhere. But there are people out there who host JRuby apps. So that maybe be a future talk, how to get this thing actually out in the wild. But for now, it's just a prototype that's running on my laptop. Anybody else? Yeah.
I just wanted to point something out. This is great talk, by the way.
Thanks.
When I'm working in Ruby, if I'm debugging or if I'm trying to understand the library that the owner for,
Is it on?
I'll use IRB and like so I can help you with it.
Yeah.
An argument for anybody who uses Java in their day job to use JRuby.
Mhm.
You can use IRB with all the stuff like that.
Yeah. No, it's JRB for these guys. I've run into a couple of little weirdnesses with this. When you're working in the console, if you get an exception, maybe it's just both the MacBook and the iMac I have do this, but you can't recall the previous command that caused the exception and then go into the line with the left arrow and fix it. It gets all screwed up. And it's something about how console works in Rails console, even JRB, when you're trying to call a command with an up arrow and then change it with the left arrow. It shoots you way down in the middle of the line, but you're actually at the end of the line and you're typing over. It's I also get a couple of weird warning messages when I start up the Rails console in Rails 308. But it works. Try to Google those problems. They don't seem to be causing any issues other than kind of annoyance when you first start, but they.
FFI curses, there's something about if you install the right gem, it'll fix that.
Yes.
FFI curses.
I was cursing at it mostly, but it didn't get in the way. Yeah, that Java 1.5.1.6 thing. You definitely, I think, have to have the latest version of Java 1.6 to get this spreadsheet stuff to work, because the error it was throwing didn't make any sense. And every place where one of the JRuby guys answered, they said, "Are you using the latest Java?" And that seemed to be the panacea, kind of like the Microsoft Windows Control-Delete of JRuby problems was to have the correct version of Ruby or of Java running. Anybody else? Sir, yes, sir. I have no idea. I'm just including them right now in a resources folder in my in the tree for the app, in the Ruby on Rails app, and I think I added that resources folder to the load path, and it knows to go and get them from there, and then you just have to include them as jars. I haven't gotten fully through the book. There may be some good suggestions on best practices for managing those. Since I'm very much on the prototyping phase, I just stick them in the class file, in the RB file, and it works. Yeah. There's probably a better way to do it, though. If anybody's used Java, you know the class path can be the death of you in trying to figure out why your app won't run, or it will run in development or in Eclipse or NetBeans, but then you actually deploy it somewhere and it doesn't work because it can't find the classes. It's all about the class path. And that Java thing at the top, as well as where you put the jars, impacts your class path. And they actually spend about half a chapter in this book talking about the class path. So if you're not a Java person, I would read and reread that section several times. Yes?
Again, so it's recorded. The question was if there was a good dependency management system for Java. And it sounds like the answer is Maven. Has anybody used Maven with a JRuby app?
I don't like.
The typical answer when you ask
But yes.
what he's dealing with about JRuby is Java has this. Can I use this in JRuby? And they say JRuby is just Java. So that I think is their stock answer for. Of course you can, you silly twit. Just do what you would do in Java. If you don't know what that is, then it's up to you to research it. So.
Interesting. So does anybody know how Maven and Ruby gems interact?
I just use RVM and use gem sets in RVM to keep all my JRuby things segregated from my regular. Again, if you're not using RVM, I highly recommend it. It makes life so much easier.
Oh, yeah. Can you do anything like extending a Java class in Ruby or implementing a Java interface in JRuby?
Yes, to both. Yes, you can do both of those. Yeah, and that's actually the part of the book I'm in right now. You can actually compile your JRuby code and use it in Java, and I haven't quite figured out why you would do that. They do mention that JRuby is a great way to stealthily get Ruby into the enterprise if you have a very Java-centric organization you work with, because it just compiles down to a jar and no one would know the difference unless they looked at the source. If it works, it works. They shouldn't care. Yeah.
So does it do like just-in-time compilation of your Ruby? Is that how the whole thing works? It turns your Ruby into bytecode?
In some cases, yes.
Wherever it's possible.
Yes.
It's not always possible.
Exactly. Yeah, and there actually are ways you can control how that's done, and if you have certain parts of your app, they actually give you some suggestions on how to make the JIT work better, and that's the whole thing about the speed up, running Ruby faster, is exactly because of that, because the compiler optimizations in the JVM have gotten actually very good, and if you have never benchmarked a Java project, you run it 1,000 times. The first time it's slow, and the second time it's in an order or two magnitude faster, and by the time you run it 5 and 6 times, it's usually 2 or 3 sometimes orders of magnitude faster than the first time you ran it. So for code that gets executed a lot, that's a beautiful thing. And we'll see if that does any good for me. My biggest concern is I don't know what the memory footprint is of loading these spreadsheets in the Poi project. I mean, the actual Excel spreadsheet itself for this thing is like 250K. So if I have 1,000 users all load a 250K spreadsheet, what's the overhead for the Apache Poi for each spreadsheet that's loaded? And if the sheet has if this book has multiple sheets, the way I plan to have multiple sheets, what's that going to do? And I'm concerned I'm going to have memory problems. But as I say, that's a bridge I'll jump off when I get to it. So if anybody knows how to memory profile in JRuby, I'd love to hear your ideas. I saw your garbage collection thing, Matt. I was going to maybe try to do that little thing that you built for the testing the GC. I don't know how applicable that is to JRuby. Yeah. That's a great idea. Because it's just Java. Yeah. I've used JProfiler before. Yeah. I'm just trying to parrot the party line here now that I'm a convert. Anybody else? Well, let's move on to the next topic. Yeah.